I have a relative that I think is probably a 9/11 denier that asked me about this account by Michael Aquino. I'm going to get into that account in just a minute or two. Just bear with me. I just want to mention a little bit about why I don't think Mike Aquino is a trustworthy source from multiple reasons. But I'm going to cover his background a little bit, and then we're going to go into his so-called factual account, and then I'm going to try to provide some evidence why it's not a valid discussion and the factual things that he has wrong.
Here's a brain teaser for you. What do these three things have in common? Theistic Satanists, the Army's Psychological Warfare Division, and the people running one of the worst and widest-ranging child exploitation rings in the history of the country. They're all Tool fans? Nope. This guy, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino.
Maybe Aquino isn't such a creep after all. Maybe he's just a LARPer with his heart in the right place. Given his totally normal hobbies, you'd imagine that, during his time in the military, his conduct was above suspicion.
Here, charges surface connecting ritual child abuse at the Presidio Daycare Center to the devil cult. It was here, parents and others allege, that as many as 60 young children were ritualistically abused by soldiers of Satan. The former chief juvenile investigator at the Presidio, Ed Abanovsky, is here. He's now a deputy sheriff in Santa Clara County. You are innocent until proven guilty. You were never charged in this case. I don't want to belabor the point. I have seen, however, the affidavits for the search warrant of your home, and they indicate the child is speaking to the authorities, not her father.
This was after she had been subjected to therapy.
Well, that's pretty bad. That's so bad that Subway Jared would be grossed out. At least it doesn't get any worse, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I was a follower of the Satanist church in Chicago here. On Walpurgis Night, I was the head acolyte for that specific ceremony. And at the end of it, we wound up murdering someone. And
a person?
Yes, ma'am. It wasn't anybody that I knew, and I reported it. But once I had reported it and decided that to quit the Satanist church, I started receiving threatening phone calls. People would come up to my door who I didn't know, and all they'd do is say, "Go back to the church," and then they'd walk away. They'd never give me their name or address.
I could tell you all kinds of things about 9/11. The notion that it was an Arab attack is completely ludicrous. It was a CIA and Mossad operation with some participation in it also by MI6. It had one purpose and one purpose only, which was to make American citizenry angry enough so that the United States would go and spill its blood on behalf of Israel to balkanize as many of the Arab countries surrounding Israel as possible. And that was the whole point of it, that every commercial airline flight has something called a manifest. This is a printout list of who's on the flight. The airlines are very precise about these, and the big airlines like United and American, they maintain these manifests very rigorously from the time that people make reservations to the time when they check in. And when they board the plane, it's all checked against that. And the very last thing that happens before the door is slammed shut on an airplane is that the final version of a flight manifest is printed out and passed in to the head flight attendant and say, "Here's who's on the fucking plane." So you know where they are and who they are. And that is what's locked in stone. Now, after 9/11, there was an initial flurry of claims that there were Arabs on all these flights and that they took them over and crashed them into things. And there were even a few tentative ad hoc flight manifests that were put out, but these weren't the actual final ones from the airlines. Those didn't surface for some years, and they were very tightly kept away from the public eye. They're available now. You could actually hunt them down if you like, and any of your listeners can too. The final official passenger manifests. And guess what you'll find when you look at them? There's not a single Arab on any of them. Not one. Zero. I think you'll find that it's kind of difficult to hijack a plane unless you're on it, right?
Yeah, there is that problem. Yeah, there is that problem. Although,
Okay.
what about the uninterruptible autopilot? That can control the plane.
There is all four of those 757s in those days, constructed by Boeing, had an automatic device which was installed by Boeing, which would permit a controller on the ground to seize control of the airplane, much like the drone systems that we have today, take the control system away from the onboard pilots, and fly and land the plane. And this was originally an anti-hijacking measure, and it was, as I said, put on all of those planes at that time. That's a matter of documentation, which readers can also look up. When that happens, all of the other control systems, such as the ground-to-flight communications from the pilot, are also seized and moved to the person who is on the ground who is controlling these systems. So the pilots become essentially passengers in the cockpit. And this was, again, originally done to prevent airplanes from being hijacked. But what it also does is permit an airplane to be taken over from the ground and flown, just like a drone. So this isn't crazy science. It's just a perfectly normal thing, like the Reapers or Predator drones. And in this case, the 4 planes were simply taken over. And to make a long story short, they were all flown to a almost completely disused air base in Massachusetts called Westover Air Base, where they were landed. The base had been cleared of all its residual personnel the day before. The base has large, oversized hangars, big enough to put 757s in, because the base was originally constructed for the C-5A Galaxy, the hugest military transports around. So the 4 planes were flown there. Selected members of the crews from them and selected passengers were then offloaded from the planes and used to make the quote-unquote cell phone calls. Now they could make the cell phone calls because their cell phones would now work, which they wouldn't way up in the air at cruising altitude. And of course, on the ground, there is no background noise from the jets that you would normally hear. If you've ridden on any kind of a commercial jet, you know that it isn't a completely silent environment. There's all the jet noise, that's going on around you. But all those calls are completely silent, and as one very alert flight attendant would later point out, all the protocols, keywords, and code systems that flight crews are normally trained to use in the event of a hijacking were completely disregarded. Then the calls themselves were all within a few moments of each other, which was possible when you brought all the 4 planes down there together. After which, not to put too gentle a point on it, the passengers of those planes, including the ones who made the phone calls, were murdered. And so much for that. The planes themselves were then flown later on down to Florida, where there is a place, a company that converts commercial 757s to commercial industrial versions to haul stuff around, and that was their disposition, basically being cleaned out and reused.
This gentleman states that a 757 could have a system where it could be flown remotely like a drone. Man, I've never seen a system like that on the 757. Yeah, there's auto land capability that can be operated from within the cockpit by the pilots, but flying it like a drone remotely, I've never seen those systems installed on the 757. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But, I'm just a retired airline pilot, and I've never seen anything like that on any of the Boeings that I have familiarity with. I'd like it if any of my fellow pilots or people that have technical knowledge could chime in, but I've never seen it. I've never seen it in any of my training manuals. I've never seen anything like that. So please help me out if my knowledge is lacking. Finally, when I was at the Flight Academy at American Airlines, there were pieces of the wreckage that had been that were there in the academy physically. And a big deal was made by some of the 9/11 deniers about the fact that the wheel inside the Pentagon that was recovered didn't match a 757 that had 10 spokes. I have some photos that'll clearly show that the wheel that was recovered within the Pentagon really was an 8-spoke 757 landing gear wheel. And the only reason that these deniers keep coming up with these stories is they want to overemphasize the theory that this was a plot by the CIA, plot by Mossad. A lot of it's anti-Israel, but the reality is we know that we had photographs of the airplane inside the Pentagon. They definitely show an American Airlines 757 and the wreckage, both outside and inside the Pentagon. And American Airlines, would have had, as I mentioned in the whole certification process of a freighter, they were built very clearly to show the wreckage parts that belonged to these airplanes in question. No, these weren't converted to a freighter. They were definitely destroyed in the impact and fire in the Pentagon. The tragedy is these crews did lose their lives, both the cockpit and the cabin crew, and we had a lot of friends that were involved. There's no indication from the actual records or skin paints from radar that these airplanes were whisked off to a secret base. Plus the fact that you can't talk on a cell phone in an airplane and have it work or work clearly is not true. There have been times where I've had to call dispatch on a cell phone and talk to them from the cockpit. Clearly not a problem. A comment about the manifest. The passengers list did show the terrorists on board, but they weren't identified as terrorists. In those days, the no-fly list was in its infancy. The hijackers' names were there. They were clearly identified later. Again, the whole airline industry was very lax at this time. I remember going through training, and some of us were saying, the nature of hijacking has changed. This whole idea we're supposed to comply with the hijackers and take them to Cuba isn't reflecting a world that has Islamic terrorists in it. But our concerns kind of fell on deaf ears. That was going to change really quickly. And so the hijackers' names were known to intelligence agency, but at that time the sharing between agencies was very primitive. And so this was not communicated. Another difficulty is the hijackers used 364 aliases, which made tracking, particularly for agencies like the FAA, very difficult. And at that time, things like a box cutter were not deemed a weapon. And so the things that were going on was just a lack of awareness, laxity, complacency. The so-called military expert in this interview shows a total lack of the certification processes that are involved from converting an airliner to a freighter. Most of that conversion in the United States is overseen by the Federal Aviation Administration, and it's done to comply with what's called a supplemental type certificate. The supplemental type certificate involves all the details of a conversion, such as installing the cargo door, reinforcing the cabin door, rerouting essential systems, and it's a major conversion process. When the aircraft arrives for the conversion to be a freighter, it's analyzed. The FAA wants to see that it has appropriate maintenance history, flight hours, and cycles. They want to make sure it's still structurally sound enough for conversion, and that it will have an operational life as a freighter. An aircraft that's timed out or is cycled out will not be allowed to go through the STC process. The owner or operator must sign a conversion agreement, and that must be done with a FAA certified conversion house. That could be an original equipment manufacturer, such as Boeing or Airbus, or there are independent third-party contractors that have this approval. Once the conversion starts, the FAA inspects the progress of the work. A lot of times this can be done in-house. There's a lot of inspection to make sure that the compliance is done. This is called compliance verification. Once the conversion has been done, they do just a basic look at the structural analysis to make sure that the work was done correctly. The systems are rerouted if that was necessary. The reinforcing of structural areas such as the floor has been accomplished. There are system integration such as your hydraulics, your electrics, and a number of things like that. That has to be inspected, and usually there's upgraded fire suppression that has to be done. Finally, there are ground and flight tests before the aircraft can be released as a freighter. It's highly unlikely that an aircraft can be just whisked away with no documentation, no maintenance history, and show up later on as a freighter. The process is very stringent. It has a lot of oversight. Typically, airplanes that are converted to freighters, their logbooks and history is very carefully scrutinized to make sure it's economically feasible for the conversion. If the aircraft's going to be operated in a foreign environment, the STC compliance must be validated by the respective foreign aviation authorities. An example of this would be the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, EASA. Also, the registration has a lineage to it. It would be updated, and the aircraft's airworthiness certificate would also be updated, but the original history is still maintained. In conclusion about Michael Aquino, is the truth is not in him. If he's covering up all his dark activities, then he's probably not being truthful about 9/11. His statements do not line up with technical facts that I personally know and that I've been able to verify. I don't think he's a credible person. And then to sum things up for a Satan follower, this happens to so many Satan followers that are totally dedicated to Satan. They take their own lives. He, at the age of 72, shot himself in the head and committed suicide.
It's frequently claimed that America is a champion of Judeo-Christian values and civil liberties. If our military is conducting mind war on its own citizens, employing techniques so subtle, so diabolical as to make the mind feel that it made those decisions without coercion, it's hard to believe that our ideals are anything but empty rhetoric. But the wise man doesn't put his faith in princes or nations or force. Perhaps St. Paul said it best in his letter to the Ephesians when he wrote, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world."
This is the most overt demonic activity I've ever seen chronicled in the national news. I've never seen anything like it. I'm going to show some disturbing images. This transgender dude, now remember, he's targeting Christian children. Look at the things that are written on the gun clips that he used to kill Christian children. So you got here, "For the children." Go to the next one. He wrote on it, "Where is your God?" Okay. Go to the next one. "Israel must fall." So we're noticing a pattern here. Okay. This is a person who is feeling not gendered, non-binary, whatever you want to say. Interestingly, in the Bible, guess who is not gendered in the Bible? Angels and demons. They are non-binary. They are gender fluid. They're targeting children. They're targeting Christians. They're targeting the land and the lineage of the Lord. Well, this is starting to sound a little creepy. I wonder what's going on here. Go to the next one and look at what this dude was using for target practice. It's literally a picture of the crucified Lord. Now let's go a layer deeper because it gets a little creepier. This is the next one, is this drawing that he had in his notebook of him looking in a mirror with a demon looking back in the mirror. And then there's all this writing, and this is a translation of the writing. And the translation is, "Who? When will this end?" So you have a tortured person, an oppressed person. Help me. I don't want to. Help. And then what's the demon say back? Kill yourself. Kill. Listen, bro, sometimes the greatest argument for the existence of God and the truth of Christianity is the very obvious existence of demons. That's that right there. It's literally like somebody opened the Bible and went, what do demons do? And then they did that thing. So every Christian should see this stuff and we should go, hey man, I know exactly what that is. The book of Ephesians says our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And then it says, but greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. The book of Ephesians says our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And then it says, but greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world.